Hey everyone, welcome back. Let me ask you something. Have you ever left a conversation with a coworker feeling confused, drained, or somehow like you agreed to something you didn't want to agree to? Maybe you walked away from a meeting wondering how someone else got credit for your idea. Or perhaps you've noticed that one person in your office who always seems to get what they want while everyone else is left scrambling. If any of this sounds familiar, pay very close attention because what I'm about to tell you is going to fundamentally change how you navigate your workplace. Right now, at this very moment, there's a good chance someone in your office is using sophisticated manipulation tactics on you, and you don't even realize it's happening. These aren't the obvious tactics. These are the invisible moves that corporate manipulators use to climb ladders, steal credit, destroy reputations, and position themselves as indispensable while making everyone else look incompetent. And the worst part? Most people never see it coming until it's too late. Before we dive deep into this, if you're getting value from this content, I need you to hit that like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss videos like this. And here's what I want to know in the comments. Have you ever realized too late that a coworker was manipulating you? What happened? Drop your story below because I guarantee others are going through the same thing right now. All right, let's expose exactly what's happening in your workplace. The modern workplace is a psychological battlefield, and most people don't even know they're in a war. We're taught to be collaborative, to be team players, to trust our colleagues. And while most people operate with genuine intentions, there's always that small percentage who view every interaction as a chess move, every relationship as a tool, and every colleague as either an asset to exploit or an obstacle to remove. These corporate manipulators understand something that most people miss. Success in the workplace isn't just about competence or hard work. It's about perception management, strategic positioning, and knowing how to pull invisible strings that make others dance without realizing they're being controlled. They've studied the unwritten rules of office politics, and they use that knowledge like a weapon. What makes corporate manipulation particularly dangerous is its subtlety. Unlike schoolyard bullying or obvious aggression, workplace manipulation happens in the shadows. It's the coworker who undermines you with a smile. The colleague who positions your ideas as their own so smoothly you question whether you ever had the idea in the first place. The team member who makes you look incompetent in front of leadership while appearing helpful and concerned. These tactics are designed to be invisible to everyone except the target. And sometimes even the target doesn't fully recognize what's happening until significant damage is done. Research in organizational psychology has identified distinct patterns of manipulative behavior in professional settings. These aren't random actions. They're strategic, calculated, and often learned behaviors that manipulators refine over years of practice. Understanding these patterns is your first line of defense because once you can see the game being played, you can't be played anymore. So let's break down exactly what's happening, the specific tactics being used against you right now, and most importantly, what you need to do to protect yourself and turn the tables. Number 1, they're triangulating communication to control the narrative. Here's one of the most insidious tactics used in corporate settings, and it's happening in your office right now whether you realize it or not. Triangulation. This is when a manipulative coworker deliberately creates a communication pattern where information flows through them instead of directly between the people who actually need to communicate. They position themselves as the middleman, the translator, the go-between, and in doing so, they gain enormous power because they control what information gets passed along, how it gets framed, and what gets conveniently left out. Here's how it works in practice. Let's say you and another coworker, we'll call her Sarah, are working on different aspects of the same project. The manipulator, let's call him David, volunteers to coordinate between you two. Sounds helpful, right? Now David tells you that Sarah said your approach won't work, and she's frustrated with your progress. Then he goes to Sarah and tells her that you're resistant to her ideas and not being a team player. Neither of you actually said these things, but now there's tension between you and Sarah, And neither of you thinks to compare notes because why would you? David's been so helpful coordinating everything. Meanwhile, David goes to your manager and positions himself as the person holding this dysfunctional team together, the voice of reason managing two difficult personalities. See what happened? David created conflict where none existed, damaged the relationship between you and Sarah so you're less likely to collaborate directly and compare notes, and positioned himself as indispensable to management, all while appearing helpful and concerned the entire time. This tactic is particularly effective because it exploits people's natural tendency to trust information that comes through an established colleague, especially if that person seems friendly and helpful. We don't immediately think someone would deliberately distort communication. We assume they're passing along information accurately. That assumption is exactly what makes triangulation so powerful. The manipulator becomes the sole source of information between multiple parties, which means they can shape reality for everyone involved. Organizational behavior experts note that triangulation thrives in environments where direct communication isn't encouraged, or where there's existing hierarchy that makes people uncomfortable going directly to each other. The manipulator exploits these structural issues to insert themselves into communication flows where they don't need to be. So, what do you do about this? First, recognize the pattern. If someone is constantly playing middleman, offering to relay messages, or telling you what others supposedly said, that's a red flag. Second, insist on direct communication whenever possible. If David tells you Sarah has concerns about your work, say great. Let me schedule a meeting with Sarah directly to discuss. Watch how quickly the manipulator tries to discourage direct communication. They'll say things like, "Oh, I don't think that's necessary, I can handle it," or "Sarah's really busy, let me deal with it." That resistance tells you everything. Third, document your direct communications. Send follow-up emails after conversations confirming what was actually discussed. This creates a paper trail that can't be manipulated later. When you say something to a coworker directly, follow up with an email, just confirming our conversation where we discussed X, Y, Z. Thanks for your collaboration on this. Now there's a record that can't be twisted. The manipulator's power disappears the moment you remove them from the communication chain. They can't control a narrative they're not part of. So, cut them out. Be polite, be professional, but be direct with the people you actually need to work with. Number 2, they're credit stealing through strategic ambiguity. This is perhaps the most common form of corporate manipulation, and it's absolutely maddening once you recognize it's happening to you. The strategic credit thief doesn't usually steal your ideas outright, at least not in obvious ways. They're far more sophisticated than that. What they do is create deliberate ambiguity around who contributed what, then leverage that ambiguity to position themselves as the primary driver of success while your contributions fade into the background. Here's the typical pattern. You're working on a project or you have an idea that you share in a relatively small setting, maybe a team meeting or a casual conversation. The manipulator is present and they listen carefully. They don't immediately claim the idea is theirs. That would be too obvious. Instead, they start doing something much more calculated. They begin referencing your idea in other contexts, but they frame it slightly differently. They add minor variations or combine it with other points. They discuss it with people who weren't in the original conversation. They build on it publicly. And here's the critical part. They never explicitly say it's their idea, but they also never explicitly credit you. They create an association in people's minds between themselves and the idea through sheer proximity and repetition. Over time, people start to naturally assume the idea originated with them because they're the one constantly talking about it, refining it, presenting it. Then, when the idea succeeds or gets implemented, guess who gets the credit? Not the person who actually came up with it, but the person who's been most visibly associated with it. By the time you try to claim credit, it looks like you're trying to steal their idea, not the other way around. The manipulation is complete. This works because of a psychological principle called the mere exposure effect. The more people are exposed to something, the more they associate it with whoever's presenting it most frequently. The manipulator understands this and exploits it ruthlessly. They also exploit organizational dynamics where leadership often only sees the final presentation, not the collaborative process that led to it. If they're the one presenting your idea to executives, executives will naturally associate the idea with them. Research on workplace dynamics shows that credit theft is one of the primary reasons talented people leave organizations. It's not just about recognition, although that matters. It's about the fundamental unfairness of someone else benefiting from your work while you're left behind. And it's about the gaslighting that often accompanies it, where the manipulator makes you feel like you're being petty or territorial for wanting credit for your own contributions. So, how do you protect yourself from strategic credit theft? First, document your ideas with timestamps. Send yourself emails outlining your concepts. Share your ideas in writing with multiple people simultaneously, so there's a clear record of when you presented them and to whom. If you have an idea in a meeting, follow up with an email to everyone present summarizing your proposal and asking for feedback. This creates an undeniable paper trail. Second, be more public with your contributions. Don't just share ideas in small settings where they can be easily co-opted. Present them in larger forums. Put them in writing to leadership directly. Make sure your name is attached from the beginning. The manipulator thrives on privacy and ambiguity. Transparency is your weapon against them. Third, when you notice someone building on your idea without crediting you, address it immediately and directly. Don't wait until the idea succeeds and credit is being distributed. The moment you hear someone presenting your concept without attribution, speak up in that moment. You can do this professionally. That's actually building on the framework I proposed last week. Let me add some additional thoughts to what I originally outlined. You're not being confrontational. You're simply making the connection explicit that this idea originated with you. Fourth, build alliances with people who were present when you shared your original ideas. These witnesses matter. If someone tries to claim your work later, you have people who can verify the timeline. The credit thief relies on people not remembering or not paying attention to who said what first. Having allies who were there removes that ambiguity. And finally, understand that some organizations and some leaders enable this behavior, either through ignorance or because they themselves benefit from it. If you're in an environment where credit theft is rampant and leadership doesn't care, you might need to consider whether this is somewhere you want to build your career. Your ideas have value. Don't let someone else build their career on your intellectual property. Number 3, they're using strategic incompetence to dump work on you. This one is brilliant in its simplicity and absolutely infuriating once you see it clearly. Strategic incompetence is when someone deliberately performs poorly at certain tasks or claims they can't do something, not because they actually lack the ability, but because they've calculated that being bad at something is more beneficial than being good at it. If they're incompetent at the boring, tedious, or difficult tasks, someone else will have to do them, and that someone is usually you. Here's how it plays out. You have a coworker who somehow never quite manages to figure out certain aspects of the job. Maybe they claim they're not good with spreadsheets, or they always mess up the reporting system, or they struggle with a particular type of client communication. At first, you help out because you're a team player. You fix their spreadsheet errors, you handle the reports they can't seem to get right, you take on the client interactions they find challenging. They're very grateful, very appreciative. They openly acknowledge that you're so much better at these things than they are, and you feel good about helping, at first. But here's what's actually happening. They're not incompetent. They're strategic. They've identified the most tedious, time-consuming, or unrewarding aspects of the job, and they've deliberately performed badly at them. So those tasks get redistributed to others, usually to conscientious people like you who can't stand to see things done poorly. Meanwhile, they're spending their time on the high-visibility, career-advancing work that actually matters for promotions and recognition. They've essentially outsourced their least desirable responsibilities to you while you were busy feeling helpful. The genius of strategic incompetence is that it's almost impossible to call out directly. If you complain that someone is dumping work on you, they can genuinely claim they tried but just aren't good at it. They're not refusing to do the work, they're just bad at it, and what are you going to do? Force them to keep doing something badly? The organization ends up naturally redistributing the work to whoever can do it competently, which reinforces the manipulator's strategic incompetence. They have no incentive to improve because being bad at something is working perfectly for them. Organizational psychology research confirms this phenomenon. Studies show that in team environments, deliberately poor performance on undesirable tasks often results in those tasks being permanently reassigned, while the strategically incompetent person faces few consequences and often advances faster because they're freed up to focus on more visible work. It's a rational, if unethical, career strategy. So, how do you handle strategic incompetence without becoming the office doormat? First, recognize the pattern. Distinguish between genuine struggle and strategic performance. Someone who's genuinely having trouble will show consistent effort to improve, will ask questions, will try different approaches. Someone who's being strategically incompetent will make the same mistakes repeatedly, won't retain information you've already explained multiple times, and will seem oddly resigned to their limitations rather than frustrated by them. Real incompetence wants to get better. Strategic incompetence wants you to take over. Second, stop enabling it. This is hard because it goes against your helpful instincts, but you have to let them fail. If someone claims they can't do spreadsheets and keeps making errors, stop fixing the errors. Let the errors go through. Let there be consequences for the poor work. The only way strategic incompetence fails as a strategy is if it actually has negative consequences for the person employing it. As long as you're buffering those consequences, you're reinforcing the behavior. Third, document the pattern and make it visible. If someone is consistently failing at certain tasks, and you're consistently picking up the slack, make sure that's documented and visible to leadership. Send emails confirming what you're taking over and why. I'm handling the client reports this week because John's submissions have had errors the last 4 times. Just want to make sure we maintain quality with the client. You're being helpful, but you're also creating a record that John repeatedly fails at this task. Eventually, leadership has to address the pattern. Fourth, set boundaries around your willingness to help. You can help someone once or twice as they learn a new skill, but if they're still struggling with the same thing after multiple explanations, that's not your problem to solve anymore. I've walked you through this process 3 times now and provided written instructions. You'll need to work through it on your own this time. If you get stuck, let's schedule time with our manager to see if there's additional training available. You're not being mean. You're being professional and directing the issue to where it actually needs to go. And, finally, protect your own career. Every hour you spend fixing someone else's strategic incompetence is an hour you're not spending on your own high-visibility work. Be very careful about becoming known as the person who handles all the tedious tasks that others can't manage. That's not a recipe for advancement. That's a recipe for being permanently stuck in a support role while the strategically incompetent people you're enabling get promoted past you. Number 4, they're using tactical flattery to extract information and favors. Flattery is one of the oldest manipulation tactics in existence, and it works disturbingly well even when people know what's happening. But corporate manipulators don't use flattery the way most people think of it. They're not showering you with constant compliments in an obvious, slimy way. They're far more sophisticated. They use tactical flattery, which is precisely calibrated compliments delivered at strategic moments to lower your defenses, extract information, or position you to give them something they want. Here's how tactical flattery works in practice. The manipulator pays careful attention to your insecurities, your aspirations, and your ego triggers. Everyone has them. Maybe you pride yourself on being knowledgeable about industry trends. Maybe you want to be seen as a team player. Maybe you're sensitive about being perceived as difficult or uncooperative. The manipulator identifies these pressure points, then uses targeted compliments to exploit them. They'll approach you when they need something, and they'll start with flattery that's specifically designed to make you want to prove the compliment is accurate. You're so good at analyzing data. I'm really struggling with this report, and I know you could figure it out in half the time it's taking me. The flattery makes you want to demonstrate that, yes, you are good at analyzing data, and before you know it, you're doing their report. Or they need information you have access to, so they come at it sideways. You always know what's really going on around here. I feel like I'm out of the loop on this project. What's your read on the situation? You feel valued for your insight and awareness, so you share information that they then use for their own purposes, possibly against you. The reason tactical flattery is so effective is that it triggers a psychological principle called reciprocity. When someone gives you something, even something as intangible as a compliment, you feel obligated to give something back. The manipulator knows this and weaponizes it. They give you flattery, which costs them nothing, and you give them time, effort, information, or favors in return. They're trading words for tangible value, and you're left feeling good about the exchange even though it was completely one-sided. Research in persuasion psychology shows that flattery works even when people know it's insincere, as long as it touches on something the target wants to believe about themselves. We're cognitively aware that someone might be flattering us to get something, but emotionally, we still respond to hearing positive things about ourselves, especially things that align with our self-image. The manipulator exploits this gap between cognitive awareness and emotional response. So, how do you defend against tactical flattery without becoming cynical and suspicious of every compliment? First, pay attention to the timing and context of compliments. Genuine appreciation usually comes after you've done something, not before someone asks you for something. If someone compliments you and then immediately pivots to a request or a question, that's tactical flattery. There's an embedded transaction happening. Second, separate the compliment from any implied obligation. Someone says, "You're great at something?" Say thank you. Accept the compliment. But don't let it create an automatic obligation to then prove the compliment by doing something for them. You can be good at data analysis and still say, "No, I don't have time to help with your report." The compliment and the favor are separate things. Don't let them be linked in your mind. Third, watch for patterns. If someone only compliments you when they need something, that tells you everything about their intentions. Genuine appreciation is distributed randomly across different contexts. Tactical flattery clusters around requests. Track this mentally. Notice who compliments you only when they want something versus who offers genuine recognition without strings attached. Fourth, call it out directly if it becomes a pattern. You can do this with humor or directness depending on your relationship with the person. I notice you always tell me how great I am at something right before asking me to do it. What do you need? This disrupts the manipulation by making it explicit. The manipulator relies on the transaction being subtle and unspoken. Making it overt removes their advantage. And fifth, be especially wary of flattery that positions you as the only person who can help with something. You're the only one who understands this system, or nobody else has your expertise in this area. This is designed to make you feel both special and obligated. In reality, you're probably not the only person who could help, but you might be the only person who hasn't learned to say no yet. Number 5. They're manufacturing urgency to bypass your rational decision-making. This tactic is everywhere in corporate environments, and it's incredibly effective at getting people to agree to things they would never agree to if they had time to think clearly. The manipulator creates artificial urgency around decisions, requests, or commitments, pushing you to respond immediately before you have time to consider whether you actually want to do what they are asking. The urgency bypasses your rational decision-making and triggers your reactive, emotional response system. Here's how it manifests. Someone comes to you with a request framed as an emergency. "I need this by end of day today." The client is waiting. Leadership needs this first thing tomorrow morning. We have to make a decision right now. The deadline is presented as absolute and non-negotiable. You feel pressure to respond immediately, to be helpful, to not be the person who drops the ball or lets the team down. So you say yes without fully considering whether the urgency is real, whether the task is actually your responsibility, or whether the timeline is genuinely necessary. Here's what you need to understand. In many cases, the urgency is completely manufactured. The manipulator has often known about this task or deadline for days or weeks, but they've waited until the last possible moment to bring it to you, because urgency reduces your ability to push back, ask questions, or set boundaries. When something is framed as an emergency, saying no feels like you're being difficult or uncommitted. The social pressure to cooperate is enormous, and the manipulator knows this. They're weaponizing your conscientiousness and your desire to be seen as reliable. The psychology behind this is well established. When we're under time pressure, we shift from System 2 thinking, which is deliberate, logical, and analytical, to System 1 thinking, which is fast, emotional, and intuitive. System 1 is much easier to manipulate because it doesn't carefully evaluate information. It takes shortcuts. It relies on social cues and emotional responses. The manipulator creates urgency specifically to keep you in System 1 mode, where you're more likely to comply without careful consideration. Organizational behavior research shows that artificial urgency is one of the most common manipulation tactics in workplace settings, particularly from people who chronically poor planners or who deliberately procrastinate so they can use urgency as a manipulation tool. So, how do you protect yourself from manufactured urgency? First, develop a standard response to urgent requests that buys you thinking time. Instead of immediately saying yes or no, say, "Let me check my current priorities and get back to you in 15 minutes." Even a brief pause allows your rational brain to engage. You can assess whether the urgency is legitimate, whether this is actually your responsibility, and whether the timeline is realistic. Second, ask clarifying questions about the urgency. What specifically makes this urgent? What happens if we deliver this tomorrow instead of today? Who set this deadline and why? Often, when you probe the urgency, you discover it's not as absolute as presented. Maybe the deadline is flexible. Maybe someone else could handle it. Maybe the manipulator just wants it done quickly for their own convenience. Asking questions exposes artificial urgency. Third, check whether this is a pattern with this particular person. Do they frequently come to you with last-minute emergencies? That's not bad luck or poor planning on their part. That's a deliberate tactic. They've learned that urgency works on you, so they keep using it. Once you recognize it as a pattern, you can address it directly. I'm noticing that several requests from you have been positioned as urgent last-minute needs. Going forward, I'll need more advance notice to accommodate your requests. You're not being difficult. You're setting a professional boundary. Fourth, be willing to let some urgent requests fail. This sounds harsh, but it's necessary. If you always accommodate artificial urgency, you're training people that this tactic works on you, and they'll keep using it. Sometimes you need to say, "I understand this feels urgent to you, but I have existing commitments I can't move. I can help you with this next week if that works." If they truly need it done urgently, they'll find another solution. If they're just trying to manipulate you into doing their work, they'll either do it themselves or find someone else to manipulate. And fifth, protect your own priorities. Every time you drop your own work to handle someone else's manufactured emergency, you're teaching your workplace that your priorities don't matter. You become the person everyone dumps their urgent requests on because they know you'll accommodate them. That's not a reputation that serves your career. Be known as someone who's helpful and reliable, but also as someone who maintains professional boundaries and doesn't respond to manipulation tactics. Number 6, they're isolating you from allies and information networks. This is a particularly insidious long-term manipulation strategy that some corporate players use to neutralize threats and maintain control. The manipulator systematically works to isolate you from relationships, alliances, and information networks that would help you see what they're doing, or defend yourself against it. They do this through subtle reputation management, strategic information control, and relationship interference. Here's what isolation looks like in practice. The manipulator starts by identifying who your allies are in the workplace. Who do you collaborate with? Who do you trust? Who values your work? Then they begin a quiet campaign to damage those relationships or insert themselves into them. They might tell your ally that you said something negative about them, something plausible enough to create doubt but not so extreme that your ally would immediately verify it with you. They might offer to collaborate with your allies on projects, slowly building a relationship where they become the primary partner instead of you. They might share information with your allies while excluding you, making you seem out of the loop or less valuable to the relationship. The goal is to either damage your relationships entirely or triangulate them so that the manipulator becomes the intermediary, which we discussed earlier. They also work to exclude you from information flows. They conveniently forget to include you on email chains. They have meetings and discussions without you, then act surprised that you weren't aware of developments. They position themselves as the source of information about projects or initiatives you're involved in, which makes people go to them instead of you. Over time, you become increasingly isolated. You're not sure what's happening on projects you're supposedly part of. Your relationships with colleagues feel strained or distant. You're left out of important conversations. And because this happens gradually, you might not even realize it's being done deliberately. You just feel increasingly disconnected and marginalized. The reason this tactic is so effective is that isolation makes you vulnerable. When you don't have allies, you don't have people who will defend you when the manipulator badmouths you. When you're cut off from information, you can't effectively do your job or defend your interests. When relationships are damaged, you lose the professional network that would normally provide opportunities, support, and protection. The manipulator knows that an isolated target is much easier to undermine, scapegoat, or push out entirely. Research on workplace bullying and political maneuvering confirms that isolation is a primary tactic used by those who want to remove competition or consolidate power. It's particularly common in environments where the manipulator feels threatened by your competence or potential. So how do you recognize and counter isolation tactics? First, pay attention to patterns of exclusion. Are you regularly left off communications you should be included on? Do you frequently find out about meetings or decisions after the fact? Are colleagues you used to work closely with suddenly distant or less collaborative? These might not be coincidences. Document the pattern. Note specific instances where you were excluded and what the impact was. Second, directly address exclusions in the moment. If you discover a meeting happened without you, don't stay silent. Send an email asking about it professionally. I noticed there was a meeting about the X project yesterday. I wasn't included but would like to stay informed since I'm working on this initiative. Can someone catch me up on what was discussed? This makes the exclusion visible and harder to repeat without it being obvious. Third, actively maintain and strengthen your professional relationships. Don't rely on existing relationships to sustain themselves. Regularly check in with colleagues, offer to collaborate, share information and resources. Build a strong network that can't be easily undermined by one person's interference. The stronger your relationships, the less likely people are to believe negative things about you without verification. Fourth, create multiple channels for information and visibility. Don't rely on one person or one team for your information about what's happening in the organization. Develop relationships across different departments and levels. Attend broader meetings when possible. Make sure your work is visible to multiple people, not just your immediate team or manager. The more distributed your network, the harder it is for someone to isolate you effectively. And fifth, if you suspect someone is deliberately working to isolate you, consider addressing it directly with them or escalating to leadership. This is a serious form of workplace manipulation that creates hostile work environments. If you have documentation of a pattern, it's worth bringing to HR or management. Frame it professionally around impact on work effectiveness, not personal conflict. I've noticed a pattern where I'm being excluded from communications and meetings that are directly relevant to my work, and it's impacting my ability to contribute effectively. I need this addressed. Don't let someone systematically destroy your professional standing without pushing back. Number 7, they're using strategic incompletion to maintain control and dependency. This final tactic is particularly frustrating because it masquerades as collaboration or delegation, while actually being a sophisticated control mechanism. Strategic incompletion is when someone deliberately never fully completes tasks, never fully transitions projects, and never fully shares information or processes. They always leave something incomplete or unclear that requires their continued involvement or intervention. This keeps them positioned as indispensable and keeps you dependent on them. Here's how it works in practice. Let's say someone is supposed to train you on a process or transition a project to you. They go through most of it, but they leave out critical details. They don't document certain steps. They forget to give you access to key systems or contacts. They tell you they've handed everything over, but when you try to actually do the work, you discover gaps. And who do you have to go back to for help? The person who trained you incompletely in the first place. They've ensured their continued involvement and importance. Or someone agrees to collaborate on a project, but they keep certain pieces to themselves. They'll share updates, but not the full picture. They'll give you some of the information you need, but not all of it. You can never quite work independently because they've strategically withheld whatever would allow you to do so. This keeps them in control of the project and ensures you remain dependent on their input. The manipulator, using strategic incompletion, has calculated that being fully replaceable is dangerous to their position. If they complete things fully, if they transfer knowledge completely, if they make themselves unnecessary, they lose leverage and importance. So they never quite finish anything. They always maintain some gap that justifies their continued involvement. This is particularly common with people who are insecure about their value or who are protecting territory. Organizational psychology research shows that information hoarding and strategic incompletion are common in environments where people feel their job security depends on being irreplaceable rather than on demonstrable value creation. It's a defensive tactic that ultimately harms organizational effectiveness but benefits the individual using it, at least in the short term. So, how do you deal with strategic incompletion? First, recognize it when it's happening. If you consistently find that projects or processes handed to you are incomplete, that's a pattern. If one person is always the bottleneck because only they have certain information or access, that's strategic incompletion. Don't assume it's accidental after it happens multiple times. Second, be explicit about what complete looks like at the beginning of any transition or collaboration. Before someone trains you or hands off a project, create a clear checklist of what needs to be transferred. Documentation, system access, contact information, process steps, historical context. Get agreement up front on what complete looks like, then hold them to it. When gaps appear, point back to the agreed-upon standard. Third, document the gaps and make them visible. When you discover something wasn't fully transitioned, don't just quietly go back to the person to fill in the gaps. Send an email making it visible. I'm finding that I don't have access to the X system which is needed to complete this process. Can you provide that access today? Or, I don't see documentation for steps 4 through 6 of this process. Can you provide that by end of week? Create a record that they're not completing their transitions fully. Fourth, escalate if it becomes a pattern that's impacting your work. If someone is consistently leaving gaps that prevent you from doing your job effectively, that's something leadership needs to address. Frame it around business impact. I'm unable to fully execute on the X project because critical information and access weren't transitioned. This is causing delays and quality issues. I need complete documentation and access to move forward effectively. And finally, when you transition work to others, model complete handoffs. Document everything thoroughly. Provide comprehensive training. Make sure the person receiving the work has everything they need to be fully independent. This sets a standard and makes it harder for others to justify incomplete transitions. It also builds your reputation as someone who's professional and thorough rather than someone who hoards information for job security. The best job security comes from being excellent at what you do and continuously learning and growing, not from making yourself artificially indispensable through information hoarding. So there you have it. 7 corporate manipulation tactics that are being used on you right now, probably by multiple people in your workplace. Triangulating communication to control narrative. Strategic credit theft through ambiguity. Strategic incompetence to dump unwanted work. Tactical flattery to extract favors and information. Manufactured urgency to bypass rational decision-making. Systematic isolation from allies and information networks. And strategic incompletion to maintain control and dependency. These aren't hypothetical tactics. These are documented patterns of manipulative behavior that organizational psychologists and workplace researchers have identified across industries and organizational levels. Understanding these tactics doesn't mean you need to become paranoid or suspicious of every colleague. Most people you work with are operating in good faith, but there's always a percentage who aren't, and those people can do enormous damage to your career, your reputation, and your peace of mind if you don't recognize what they're doing. The key to protecting yourself is awareness, documentation, and boundaries. Be aware of these patterns so you can recognize them when they're happening. Document interactions and patterns so you have evidence if you need to escalate or defend yourself. And maintain firm professional boundaries around your time, your work, and your willingness to accommodate manipulation tactics. Remember that manipulators rely on your good nature, your desire to be helpful, your reluctance to cause conflict, and your assumption that others are operating in good faith. Those are actually positive qualities. Don't let manipulators make you cynical or distrustful. Instead, develop the ability to recognize exploitation and respond to it effectively while maintaining your integrity and professionalism. You can be both kind and boundaried. You can be both collaborative and protective of your interests. You can be both helpful and strategic about who you help and how. The most successful people in corporate environments aren't the most ruthless or manipulative. They're the people who understand the political dynamics, protect themselves from exploitation, and operate with both competence and integrity. That's the balance you're aiming for. If this video opened your eyes to dynamics in your workplace, hit that like button and share this with colleagues who need to see it. Subscribe for more content on workplace psychology, career strategy, and protecting yourself in professional environments. And drop a comment telling me which tactic you've experienced most frequently. Let's build awareness together so fewer people get manipulated by these corporate dark psychology tactics. Remember, the game is being played whether you know the rules or not. You might as well learn the rules so you can play effectively and protect yourself. I'll see you in the next video.